Dear students, good morning. In this lecture, I will discuss about the pericardium and internal features of heart. Following objectives will be covered in this lecture. First, we will begin with the pericardium. You can see in the picture, this is the pericardium. So the pericardium encloses heart as well as the great vessels of the heart. Structurally, it consists of two layers. The outer layer is called fibrous pericardium. You can see the white color structure. This is the fibrous pericardium. Deep inside, what you see is the serous pericardium. Unlike fibrous pericardium, it is a closed sac. Due to invagination by the heart, the serous pericardium, it consists of two layers, outer parietal layer and inner visceral layer. The space between these two layers is the pericardial cavity. The pericardial cavity is filled with a pericardial fluid. So the function of the fluid is to prevent the friction between the two layers and also to allow the free movements of heart. So the relations of the fibrous pericardium we discussed in detail in the introduction to anatomy. So after knowing briefly about the position and layers of pericardium, so we talk about the sinuses that are located within the pericardium. First of all, between the two layers of serous pericardium, you can see the pericardial cavity. At two places, this pericardial cavity, it is extensive or it is wide. Such wide or extensive spaces of your pericardial cavity are called sinuses. Sinus is the term used to denote the space. So here I will show you one sinus which is in transverse direction, where the index finger is passed or probed, and this space is called transverse sinus. Where exactly it is located? It is located between the great arteries and veins of the heart. You will understand this by knowing the boundaries of it. Anteriorly, it is bounded by ascending aorta on the right side, pulmonary trunk on the left side, and posteriorly it is bounded by a vein. Here you can see this is your superior vena cava. On both sides, this sinus communicates with the actual pericardial cavity. Why you need to know the position and boundaries of this particular sinus? So here I will explain. Functionally, this space is important to allow the expansion of the veins, particularly your superior vena cava. And clinically, this sinus is used to pass a ligature or a surgical clamp to what you call hold or to stop the blood flow through these great vessels, particularly the pulmonary trunk and ascending aorta. So this is frequently used while performing cardiac surgeries to control the hemorrhage. I will repeat, the transverse sinus is used to pass a ligature or a surgical clamp around the great arteries of the heart. So this procedure, this aspect is usually done while performing cardiac surgeries in order to control hemorrhage. So that is the significance of transverse sinus. Now we will move on to the another sinus that is located in the pericardium. That is your oblique sinus. I will explain this in the next slide. Here I will show you the oblique sinus. So oblique sinus can be located after lifting the heart. So here the heart is lifted to locate the oblique sinus. Because of the direction of this space, it is called oblique sinus. And where exactly it is present? It is present just behind the left atrium. What are the boundaries of this space? Anteriorly, it is bounded by left atrium, obviously, and behind by the parietal pericardium, which is the parietal layer of serous pericardium. The significance of this particular sinus is to allow the dilatation of the left atrium during filling phase. And if you remember, so here the heart is particularly in the middle mediastinum. Just behind the middle mediastinum, what you see, one of the structure of your posterior mediastinum, that is your esophagus. So during dilatation of left atrium, it come in very close contact with your esophagus. So due to the presence of this sinus, the peristaltic movements of the esophagus will not have any effect on the filling phase of your left atrium. In simple words, presence of oblique sinus prevents pressure on the left atrium during swallowing, particularly during peristaltic movements of esophagus. Hope you understood. So here in this picture you can see the position of the oblique sinus. So here the heart is removed, only the pericardium, the parietal layer is intact, in order to show the what you call oblique pericardial sinus. So thank you. In few cases, the enlarged left atrium would compresses the immediately behind structure, that is your esophagus. You can appreciate this in this radiograph. This is the lateral chest radiograph, which is taken after performing barium swallow procedure. What is barium swallow? It is a radiographic technique to visualize the esophagus and stomach. So this is a lateral radiograph of chest, so where you can make out the outline of the heart here, particularly this is the left atrium, and you can make out the narrowing of esophagus. So here this is your esophagus. In the lower part it is narrowed due to pressure by the left atrium. In general, due to the presence of what you call oblique sinus, so your enlarged, or the filled left atrium in diastolic phase, it will not cause any pressure on the esophagus. But if there is any excessive enlargement of the left atrium, that causes a narrowing of the esophagus. Hope you understood. The blood supply, the fibrous and parietal layers of pericardium supplied by the branches coming from internal thoracic artery and descending thoracic aorta, whereas the visceral layer, it is supplied by the coronary arteries, which are the arteries of the heart musculature. The venous drainage, the fibrous and parietal layers drained into internal thoracic and azygous veins, whereas visceral layer drains into coronary sinus. So about the coronary arteries and coronary sinus, we will discuss in detail in the next lecture. So timing, remember the blood supply of pericardium. The nerve supply, the fibrous pericardium and parietal layer of serous pericardium, they are supplied by the phrenic nerve, which has the root value C3, C4 and C5, due to which the pain is referred to these dermatomes, C3, C4 and C5 dermatomes. Whereas the visceral layer, it is supplied by the autonomic nerves, which are contributed by the vagus nerve and sympathetic nerves. We will discuss some of the clinical aspects related to pericardium. Pericarditis, it is the inflammation of serous pericardium. So in this condition, the two layers of serous pericardium become rough. So due to friction between these two layers, they produce typical sounds which you can hear through the stethoscope, particularly on the left border of the sternum. So these sounds are called pericardial friction rub. There is another condition which is called pericardial effusion, where you can see excessive accumulation of fluid. So here you can see the chest radiograph with pericardial effusion. So here, due to the presence of excessive fluid, the pumping effect of heart will be affected. This results in poorly audible heart sounds. You can say heart sounds muffled in this condition. Due to the presence of excessive fluid, you cannot see the external features of the heart clearly, and the whole heart shows globular shape. So this radiographic impression or this radiographic feature is called globular heart shadow. So whenever you see the globular heart shadow, it shows that there is a pericardial effusion. Pericarditis results in chest pain. So this chest pain usually severe and sharp, and it is sudden in onset. Particularly it is located behind the sternum, and this pain will increase during inspiration and also when you are lying back or on the left side, and the pain will reduce while sitting and in leaning forward position. The pain from the pericardium, it will radiate to the neck and also to the left shoulder and also over the trapezius muscle due to the C3, C4 and C5 dermatomes. This is about pain related to the pericardium, particularly in the pericarditis. Cardiac tamponade, which is heart compression. So this heart compression usually caused by the excessive fluid in the pericardial cavity. So this excessive fluid in the pericardial cavity will not allow the actual movements of the heart. So the pumping capacity of the heart will be reduced. The clinical manifestations of this particular condition is described in the form of Beck's triad, which include hypotension due to the involvement of venous return into the heart. The jugular veins will get dilated. You can say venous distension you can observe, and also you can see the poorly audible heart sounds. So these are the three important clinical manifestations that you can observe when there is a cardiac tamponade. Pericardiocentesis. This procedure is performed in order to drain the fluid from the pericardium. So usually this procedure is performed when a patient is suffering from pericardial effusion. As you know, pericardial effusion will lead to cardiac tamponade. So in order to relieve cardiac tamponade in patient with pericardial effusion, as a physician you perform pericardiocentesis. So this procedure is performed in two ways, either through parasternal route or costoxiphoid route. First we talk about parasternal route. As the name suggests, in this procedure the needle is introduced in the left or sixth intercostal space close to the sternum. But when you do this, you should avoid injury to the internal thoracic vessels. As you know, internal thoracic vessels has the course very close to the sternum. And why you are performing in the fifth or sixth intercostal space on the left side? Because only this is the only place where the heart is not covered by the lungs due to the cardiac notch of left lung. So because of this reason, the needle directly will introduce into the pericardial cavity when you introduce particularly in the fifth or sixth intercostal space. on the left side. Hope you understood the parasternal root. The other root is called costoxiphoid root. As the name suggests, in this procedure, you can see in the picture, there is an angle between xiphoid process and costal margin. I will show you here also. Between the xiphoid process and costal margin, there is an angle. So the needle is introduced in the left costoxiphoid angle. By doing this, we will enter the needle directly into the pericardial cavity and the fluid will be drained. So this procedure is called costoxiphoid root procedure. So this is about pericardiocentesis. So with this we finish the pericardium. Now we will move on to the heart. After knowing the pericardium, now we will discuss about the internal features of the heart. So in this lecture particularly we will talk about the interior or internal features of heart. Briefly about external features, you can review it from the introduction to anatomy. So heart presents 3 surfaces, 4 borders, and on the surfaces you can see the grooves where you can see the presence of the coronary arteries and its branches, and also you can see the veins draining the cardiac musculature. So reviewing of the external features are important to understand the internal features. That is why we brought here the pictures of external features. So this is a chest radiograph. So where you can see the various external parts of the heart. So this is the self-explanatory. You need to identify each of them. So it is important for the practical. Now we will move on to the interior. First we talk about the atria, particularly the right atrium. The right atrium receives venous blood from whole body through the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, and then it pumps the blood through the atrioventricular orifice into the what you call right ventricle, and the upper end of the right atrium it is prolonged and forms the right auricle. And on the surface, we discussed already earlier in the introduction to anatomy, it presents a sulcus which is called as sulcus terminalis. This will corresponds with the internal ridge you can see in the picture. So this internal ridge is called crista terminalis, and just below the opening of your superior vena cava, so there you can see the presence of SA node. SA node is present in the right atrium just below the opening of superior vena cava and at the upper end of crista terminalis. That is the location of SA node. So it is divided into 3 parts. The interior, the posterior part, it is smooth as you see in the picture. This is called sinus venerum. Due to this embryological development, you will understand this better when you do it in the cardiovascular system course in the next semester. So timing, remember, the posterior wall it is smooth and it is also called sinus venerum due to its source of development. And the anterior part or anterior wall of the right atrium, it is rough. This is rough due to the presence of the arrangement of cardiac muscle in the form of tooth of a comb which is called musculi pectinati. So pectinati means that it resembles like a teeth of a comb, that is why it is called pectinati. So particularly it is called musculi pectinati, and it presents here. This is the septum, so it presents the septum. So posterior wall here, and here it presents a septum which separates the right atrium from the left atrium. So the interior divided into 3 parts: smooth posterior wall, a rough anterior wall, and septal wall. First we talk about the posterior wall, which is also called sinus venerum. So here you can see the openings of the veins. First, here you can see the opening of superior vena cava here, and then in the lower part you can see the opening of inferior vena cava, and this inferior vena cava, it is guarded by a valve here. This is a valve of inferior vena cava. And also you can see here the opening of coronary sinus. It is located between the inferior vena cava opening and the right atrioventricular orifice. So between them you can see the opening of coronary sinus. The coronary sinus opening, it is guarded by the Thebetian valve. So the valve is particularly, it is called Thebetian valve. And also you can see the openings of many small veins. These small veins are called venae cordis minime. Venae cordis minime are the small veins which are draining the various musculature of various chambers of the heart. They are all finally drain into your right atrium. So in simple, the posterior wall receives the veins from the body as well as veins from the heart itself, which is the coronary sinus and venae cordis minime. The rough part or the pectinate part, this is the anterior wall. You can see it is opened in order to show the posterior part and septum. So when you look at this part, it shows some transverse muscular ridges. I mean the cardiac muscle here, it is arranged in the form of a transverse ridges, and it resembles like a comb. That is why it is called pectinate. And if you look at the extent from the crista terminalis, crista terminalis into the right auricle, and within the right auricle they form what you call network, reticular network. You can see inside it form a reticular network within the right auricle. Now we talk about the septal wall or septal part. So the septum presents a shallow depression here. You can see this is called fossa ovalis, and embryologically it is formed by a septum which is called septum primum. So you will understand this better when you do the development of the heart in the next semester. So timing, remember, this fossa ovalis, it is formed by the what you call septum primum. There is upper margin here. This upper border of your fossa ovalis is called limbus fossa ovalis. It is spelled here, limbus fossa ovalis. This lower margin, I mean this upper border of this fossa, which is the limbus fossa ovalis, it is formed by the lower margin or lower border of septum secundum. I will explain this even in the next slide. Sometimes in few infants you can find some that between these two parts, fossa ovalis and your limbus fossa ovalis, there you can see presence of a foramen which is called foramen ovale. So presence of this foramen is abnormal, it's an anomaly, but otherwise in all individuals this foramen will be closed. Here I will explain how the interatrial septum is formed, what is foramen ovale, and when it is closed. So here you can see during fetal life, and this is after birth. So in the fetal life the circulation is different when compared to adult circulation. So here you can see the right atrium cavity, this is the left atrial cavity. The partition between them is called interatrial septum. So this interatrial septum comes from two sources. One is the septum secundum, the upper portion of the septum. The lower portion of the septum come from septum primum. So between these two parts you can see a valve-like opening which is like a oval shaped. That is why it is called foramen ovale. In the fetal life, as the lungs are not functional and the placenta take over the function, the right atrial pressure is always high when compared to the left atrium, due to which the blood from the right atrium will pass or will shunt through this foramen ovale into the left atrium. And remember, this opening is act like a valve. And now after birth, once the lungs become functional, now the pressure of left atrium is higher than the right atrium, due to which the valve like foramen ovale will be closed. Because of the pressure, your septum primum closes your foramen ovale. And now once it is completely closed, the upper part here, where exactly the septum primum is closing your foramen ovale, and this portion, it forms a saucer shaped depression in the adult interatrial septum, which is called fossa ovalis, and the margin which is formed by septum secundum in the adult, it is called limbus fossa ovalis. Hope you understood. In few infants, due to developmental errors, this foramen ovale remains, and it leads to various consequences, and this results into one of the congenital anomaly of the heart. Hope you understood. As I mentioned in the previous slide, in few infants the foramen ovale remains. So this incomplete closure of foramen ovale causes shunting of blood from left atrium to right atrium. This overloads the pulmonary vascular system. Subsequently, it causes hypertrophy of your right atrium, right ventricle, and also the pulmonary arteries. So altogether it is called atrial septal defects. We discuss the interior of the right ventricle. Briefly, the right ventricle receives the blood from the right atrium through the right atrioventricular orifice, which is guarded by the tricuspid valve. Then it pumps the blood through the pulmonary trunk finally to the lungs. It consists of two parts. The inflowing part, where it receives the blood from the right atrium, which is rough, that is why it is called rough inflowing part, and the upper part, which will lead into the pulmonary trunk, is called smooth outflow part. As you see in the picture, this is smooth. So the smooth part, it is also called infundibulum. You can see here labeled infundibulum. These two parts, the smooth part and the rough part, both are separated by a ridge. This ridge is called supraventricular crest. And the interior presents two orifices. This is called right atrioventricular orifice, and here you can see another orifice which is called pulmonary orifice. We'll continue. The rough part, so this is the rough part. The rough part, if you see, the cardiac muscle is arranged in the form of ridges, bridges, and papillary muscles. So all these three together called trabeculae corneae. So the rough part of the right ventricle presents trabeculae corneae. What it is? It is the cardiac muscle which is arranged in the form of ridges. What is ridges? These are the linear elevations that you can see here, and then between one wall to another wall you can see some structures which are called bridges. So they will extend from one wall to another wall. So you can see one of the bridge, very prominent bridge. This prominent bridge here, it is called moderator band. Within the moderator band you can see the right branch of AV bundle, and also you can see some pillar like structures of cardiac muscle. These pillar like muscles are called papillary muscles. In the right ventricle there are three papillary muscles. You can see them: anterior, posterior, and septal. So they can be single or it can be in the form of a group. Anterior papillary muscles, posterior papillary muscles, and septal papillary muscle. Anterior is the largest among these three. So from the papillary muscles to the leaflets of your tricuspid valve, you can see some fibrous threads. So these fibrous threads or string like structures are called chorda tendineae. So these are the string like structures extending between the cusps of valve to the tip of the papillary muscles. They are called chorda tendineae. What is the function of these papillary muscles? These papillary muscles prevent excessive upward movements of the valves during ventricular systole. I will explain. So basically this tricuspid valve, it opens during what you call atrial systole and ventricular diastole, and during ventricular diastole these cusps of the valve will close so that the blood from the right ventricle will not enter into the right atrium. If the papillary muscles are not functioning, the cusps will, due to the pressure of the blood in the right ventricle during ventricular systole, the cusp will avert into the right atrium. So the papillary muscles will prevent such aversion of the cusps during ventricular systole. Hope you understood. Left atrium, briefly, it pumps the blood into left ventricle through the left atrioventricular orifice, which is guarded by the mitral valve. As you know, the left atrium presents anterior wall which is formed by the interatrial septum. This is the interatrial septum, and the posterior wall, it receives the four pulmonary veins. The rest of the part, it is the posterior wall which receives four pulmonary veins, and there is extension in the left atrium which is your left auricle, and within the left auricle you can see the musculi pectinati, which you have seen already in the right auricle. Similar to the right auricle, even in the left auricle you can see the cardiac musculature shows reticular network which is called musculi pectinati. And within the anterior wall here, which is the interatrial septum, there is a fossa. This is called lunate fossa. This shows the presence of your septum secundum. We'll move on to the left ventricle internal features. As you know, the left ventricle receives the blood from the left atrium, then it pumps the blood out through the aorta. Similar to the right ventricle, even the left ventricle has two parts. The rough inflowing part, as you see in this rough inflowing part, and the upper part is the smooth part. Upper part, which is the smooth, it is also called vestibule, and that lead to aorta. So the rough inflowing part, similar to the right ventricle, it presents trabeculae corneae, which consist of ridges, bridges, and papillary muscles. So the papillary muscles, unlike right ventricle, here you can see only two, anterior and posterior, and they are connected to the cusps of your mitral valve by the chorda tendineae. As you know, the left ventricle presents two orifices, the mitral orifice and aortic orifice. Interventricular septum. So here you can see this is the section through the heart where you can see the right ventricle and left ventricle. Between the two ventricles you can see the interatrial septum. This part has, the septum has got two parts. The lower muscular part, this one I labeled here. The upper thin portion is called membranous part, and it is not straight in position. The interventricular septum, it bulges into the cavity of the right ventricle. So if something goes wrong with the development of interventricular septum, it leads to ventricular septal defects, which are called VSD, and usually this defect is seen in the membranous part because of its complex development. So when there is a defect, blood will shunt from the left side to right ventricle, and this shunt finally causes pulmonary disease and lead to cardiac failure. We talk about the differences between the right ventricle and left ventricle. You can appreciate this from this picture. This is the transverse section through the ventricles. This is the right ventricle, this is the left ventricle. How I could identify this? Always the cavity of the right ventricle is crescent and the left ventricle cavity it is circular. This is due to the bulging of interventricular septum towards the right ventricle. The main difference that also you can appreciate here from the picture, the musculature of your left ventricle 3 times thicker than the right ventricle, and even the pressure here the left side it is 5 to 6 times more. And also you can make out the papillary muscles in the left side, they are well developed, and even the chorda tendineae are very thick and well developed. Here you can see where you can see the musculature very thick, that is the left side ventricle, where the musculature is thin, that is your right ventricle. We talk about the valves of the heart. You already know them. There are 2 atrioventricular orifices which are guarded by 2 atrioventricular valves, which are tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, and there are 2 semilunar valves. They are pulmonary valve and aortic valve. I labeled them already. You can appreciate from the pictures. So here you can see the tricuspid valve, and which are connected to the papillary muscles by the chorda tendineae. Here you can see the mitral valve, which is connected to the 2 papillary muscles in the left ventricle. So these are the semilunar valves. This is the aortic valve and this is the pulmonary valve. So in each semilunar valve we can see the 3 cusps which are semilunar in shape with the concavity upwards. So the outer part of, where exactly the each cusp of your semilunar valve is attached, they shows bulgings. They are called sinuses. In case of aorta, in case of aortic valve, they are called aortic sinuses. In case of pulmonary valve, they are called pulmonary sinuses. The aortic sinuses are very important to know because 2 of them give origin to the coronary artery. I will discuss this in the next lecture. So timing, remember, the semilunar valve consists of 3 cusps, each cusp semilunar in shape with the concavity upwards, and then where the cusp is attached to the wall of the aorta or the pulmonary trunk, they shows bulgings. Such bulgings are called sinuses. In case of aortic valve, they are called aortic sinuses. In case of pulmonary valve, they are called pulmonary sinuses. After knowing the valves of the heart, we discuss about some of the clinical aspects related to the heart valves. There are 2 conditions, stenosis and valvular insufficiency. I will explain these 2 from the figures. First we talk about the stenosis. In case of stenosis, the valve failed to open fully, due to which the blood flow to a chamber is very slow. So here you can see the stenosis in the mitral valve. So due to the stenosis, when there is atrial systole, the blood flow to the left ventricle is very slow. So the filling phase of your left ventricle will be affected. On the other hand, when there is a valvular insufficiency, what happens? The valve failed to close completely during ventricular systole, due to which the blood from the left ventricle, here it is escaping or regurgitating into your left atrium. So this is about the difference between valvular stenosis and valvular insufficiency. Both are explained in relation to the mitral valve. One is stenosis, where the valve failed to open fully, and here there is a failure of closure of the valve. So this condition is called valvular insufficiency. Hope you understood. So during fetal life, there is a connecting vessel between arch of aorta and pulmonary artery. This connecting vessel is called ductus arteriosus. Remember, it is only existing in the fetal life. But after birth, this is the adult cadaver. So what happens if you see this particular connecting structure? This vessel which is there in the fetal life, it is replaced by a fibrous tissue. So this fibrous connection between the aorta and pulmonary artery, which is pointed here, this is called ligamentum arteriosum. So after birth, so all of us will have a fibrous connection between the aorta and pulmonary artery, which is called ligamentum arteriosum. But in the fetal life, this is the vessel which allows the blood bypass the blood from the pulmonary artery into aorta due to non-functioning of the lungs, and this particular vessel is called ductus arteriosus. So please note the difference between ductus arteriosus and ligamentum arteriosum. Here we see briefly the structure of the heart. The heart consists of 3 layers, from superficial to deep. If you trace, the most outer layer is called epicardium. This is the visceral layer of your serous pericardium. You cannot separate this from the surface of the heart. Next you have the main constituent of your heart, that is your cardiac musculature, cardiac muscle. And inner aspect of your myocardium, what you see is the endocardium. This endocardium consists of endothelium and subendothelial connective tissue. You can make out here endothelium and subendothelial connective tissue. Nerve supply of the heart. The heart is supplied by the cardiac plexus, which are contributed by the both parasympathetic and sympathetic. The plexus are in the form of 2 sets, superficial cardiac plexus and deep cardiac plexus. You can see the picture. Based on the location, they are named superficial and deep cardiac plexus. They distribute the SA node, AV node, cardiac musculature and coronary arteries. When I say coronary arteries, particularly the smooth muscles in the wall of the arteries. The parasympathetic comes from vagus. The function of it is to reduce the heart rate and force of contraction, and they constrict the coronary arteries. On the other hand, the sympathetic fibers, they increases the heart rate and force of contraction, and they dilate the coronary arteries. The sympathetic fibers come from T1 to T5 spinal segments. This is about the nerve supply of heart. When you look at the fibrous skeleton of the heart, which means the framework of the heart, this framework consists of 4 fibrous rings, as you see in the picture. These 4 fibrous rings are particularly located around the 2 atrioventricular orifices, the right atrioventricular ring and the left atrioventricular ring, and also around the pulmonary orifice and aortic orifice. So these fibrous rings provide attachment to the valves, or can say valve cusps, and then these rings separates the musculature of your atria and ventricles. That is the reason both atria and ventricles are electrically isolated. and only the connection, electrically connection between your atria and ventricle is your AV bundle. So this is about the fibrous skeleton of the heart. I will repeat the important point. Due to the presence of your fibrous skeleton, the musculature of atria and ventricle are electrically isolated from each other. The only connection between the atria and ventricle is your conducting system of the heart, particularly the AV bundle. Thank you very much.